Welcome to The Teacher's Story, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of educators and advocates in the field of education. Here, we celebrate those who champion our children's potential and seek innovative approaches to nurture their brilliance. Join us as we share candid stories, explore impactful ideas, and showcase effective educational programs. This podcast stands for transparency, authenticity, and innovation, driven by the belief that we can revolutionize the education system to ensure every individual thrives. Together, let's redefine education as a pathway to human flourishing. Hi, welcome to The Teacher's Story. This is Jackie Scully, and today we have John Rainford with us. He is a Chief Imagination Officer of LearnWithLeaders.com, a speaker on AI innovation systems, leadership, business intelligence marketing, and also a big focus in education, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, and systems thinking, which I am all about. I love this topic. So thank you, John, for coming on the show.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
So my first question for you is, tell us a little bit about your background before we get into more of your work with looking at the education system.
Okay, I suppose really I've always been involved in innovation, in business. Probably 90% of my experience is in industry. I fell into education. That's another story. But yeah, so I sort of always been involved in creativity in one form or another, found it helped with businesses, got involved with some very large businesses, some of the biggest companies in the world, like Shell, ABB, Rolls-Royce, people like that. So had fun doing it and getting paid as well. It was great fun. But I was actually, I think, contributing something really useful to those organizations around leadership and personal development and business development and community development. So on my travels, I realized that actually all this wisdom that I sort of happened upon, I would say, could be transferred to the younger generation. The terminology would be slightly different, but with systems thinking, for example, which is really a process for understanding the whole organization, yourself, and relation to the organization, alongside a sort of awakened leadership. So it's like a leadership which is much more tuned into what other people are thinking, like empathy, but also realizing their contribution to the well-being of community. So I felt really that my path should really be redirected towards creating the most benefit for humankind, and especially with children, because they're our future. So I'm trying to work with, well, I'm doing it in different parts of the world, in small pockets, in Africa, India, Middle East, partly in the US as well, partly in the UK. I probably missed somewhere out there, but it doesn't matter. But we're working with bands of people who actually believe that education is really about well-being and building relationships and understanding that it's really to help people to think for themselves, I think. Certainly adopt their own understanding of what education is about, adopt their own learning. And I think the teachers should be mentors and guide children, not necessarily just impart knowledge. So I'm on the cusp of various world leaders around the world, talking to them about how we might manifest this change. And I'm focused on that at the moment. Lots of great conversations. And I think if we have these pockets, of model innovation platforms, they could take off, because it's the best of the system that we've got, which is about, as you know, 150 years old. So I think countries are starting to wake up to the possibilities, and a lot of people around the world. I think there is a surge of, awakening of kind, a spiritual awakening of, what are we here for? but what can we contribute to our fellow human beings? And it's through our education that will manifest itself, I think. I
You're
don't know whether
speaking
that
my
was a
language.
oh, great, on the same page. Excellent.
That on the same page. It's totally where this podcast has been going. It started in its roots in 2022 to just be a space to have teachers share their story, because a lot of them were heartbroken in leaving the system. But now it truly is having people like yourself on, a lot of individuals that don't have maybe that traditional, I was a teacher, here's my story track, but people in different fields who deeply care about the educational system because they care about kids. Like you said, they care about the future, they care about future leaders. And I've been having more and more conversations like this one, talking about this kind of spiritual awakening and not needing to be like woo-woo or anything, but there is a consciousness awakening that is happening. I think it's happening out of the pandemic because people were kind of sick and tired of the way these systems are. And now there's like a spotlight on all of the problems within the system. So I love that your focus now is on education and on young people. I love this idea of um, conscious leadership, right? Really getting at like the empathy of being a good leader, which is seeing other people and seeing their strengths and using that in your organization. And I think that really is a huge part of this kind of awakening that you're talking about. I would love to learn more, or if you want to share first before we get into maybe some of the countries and the leaders you were talking about your systems thinking. You do a lot of writing on this on LinkedIn. And I will plug all of this later on. We'll talk about like where to find you, and I'll plug links in the show notes, because you've got to reach out to John and read his articles about systems thinking and leadership, because they are brilliant. Such wonderful ideas. So if you could share maybe a little bit about that.
I think really I discovered systems thinking. I think it's always been around, probably for thousands of years. It's a better way of making decisions because you're taking in the whole picture as opposed to just a very myopic vision of where you're at. And the way to illustrate this is maybe if you see a chessboard, if you just see a part of the chessboard, you don't know what's going on. You can't possibly know what's going on. So it's like there's a lot going on around you, all things that are really important to you in that same scenario, but we don't know really what's going on. So we don't necessarily make the best decisions because we're only seeing a small part of the puzzle. So the systems thinking idea, and I don't think it's completely new in any sense. It's been around for a long time, and I fell upon it through various workshops that I did with people like Shell and scientists and so on. And it was a discovery process, I think, that actually we can make better decisions if we know what's going on around us, but also we need to prepare the mind to make those decisions, because there is no point in having a map if you don't know how to use the map.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and this is a typical, if you explore systems thinkers, think it's all about mapping out the problem and we'll solve it and so forth. And when I first went into big organizations and saw them when they did mind maps, they would go around the walls forever, forever in a day, all these little mind maps and so forth. But actually wasn't reaching any conclusion. It was just like going off for a tangent for no good reason. So I thought, well, actually what we need to do is prepare our minds to solve problems. How do we solve problems? Well, we tend to do it through linear thinking, which we learn at school. 1 and 1 always makes 2. But if you know anything about quantum physics, for example, 1 and 1 doesn't always make 2. And actually, there's a multi-dimensional view of how 1 and 1 works. So I think scientists are becoming to realize this now, and systems thinking will aid AI, I think. It's very powerful AI, but we want to use it in the right way. We don't want to make erroneous decisions about our future based on current or the myopic knowledge on a chessboard. We need to have a bigger vision. So, for example, if we cause pollution in one part of the river, we need to go further down the river maybe, or further up the river to find out actually what's going on. So systems thinking is really allied to a lot of like chaos theory, all sorts of different theories are sort of interconnected. And that's what I found fascinating working with scientists, that we were actually joining all the dots. And it was exciting because, and then we developed a matrix, which was like lots of bubbles on a screen where you could move the bubbles, you could put content in the bubbles, but we could move the bubbles in real time and talk to other participants around the world in real time. So it didn't need a special software program, it was online. And that needs developing as well. I've got some ideas for how that could really be integrated with AI. And AI has been, if you look at it dispassionately, it's actually thrown up a lot of our frailties, our prejudices, our unconscious bias. And those are exactly the same subjects we talked about when we were trying to innovate with scientists. Where does the unconscious bias come from? How can we actually make sure we're making decisions we're not based on our unconscious bias or linear thinking? So we take them through exercises where we see what linear thinking really is and what holistic thinking is, and look at the benefits. And to some extent, people will, use a combination of linear thinking and they'll start to think holistically, but not sufficiently well enough. And this is where the problems lie with problem solving itself. Because if you have a myopic viewpoint and a limited access to information, for example, or relevant information, you're going to make wrong decisions, or you're going to have to come back to it a few years later or whatever it is. But businesses don't work like that. The world doesn't work like that, because evolution happens in real time. It doesn't wait for a business plan to mature in a year's time or 2 years' time. It's happening now. So what I would be teaching businesses and scientists is how to evolve your business in real time, not wait for the next meeting or whatever it was. So I developed a process called the Innovation Matrix, called other things like Darwin Matrix and things like that. But nevertheless, it's just basically a better way to make decisions. And corporations lap this up. I mean, because obviously I work with a few corporations, and lots of businesses did. And it became quite elitist, which is nice, because it was like you get paid a lot of money. But actually, there's a greater potential here to change the whole of education, to change the whole of the health sector. Because they're still making wrong decisions. We know it's broken, but we don't know how to fix it.
Absolutely.
Whereas if we make better decisions, more holistic decisions, for example, there's a better likelihood of getting a better result. And actually taking the level of insight to another level. So it's not just a question of trying to solve today's problems, but actually maybe with a bigger vision, we can see the future and say, well, actually, how can we change the present to adapt to the future? So I was privileged to work on 50-year business plans sometimes, which sounds a bit nuts. But when you think about these companies, they're hedging their bets about the future. They need to think long term. And of course, the problem we've got today, again, is that we think short term. It's about elections every 4 or 5 years or whatever. But unfortunately, that still translates to linear thinking. And in education, thinking short-term fixes will fix the problem, and it never does. Of course, it only moves the problem to another part of the matrix. So the idea of the matrix is to see what all the possibilities are, but at the same time making sure that you are strategic in the way you think, because you could look for millions of possibilities, but that's not going to help you. What you need to have is a decisive mindset, which are looking for certain types of strategic thinking. So I'm excited about it, because I've gotten inquiries from all parts of the world at the moment. So, and I'm having that same sort of conversations, sharing some of the matrices I've got at the moment, which needs to be updated, because the stuff that I've used is 10 years technology out of date and needs to be updated all the time. But at the same time, it's so accessible and easy to use. And I had some of my students teach some of this thinking without any software or any technology in remote villages in India to empower young women, for example. So it's a lot of it's already happening, but it's obviously it's not quite recognized yet in the way that it should be.
Yeah. And I think this aligns so much with what we should be doing in education with kind of this, using this matrix thinking, the systems thinking, because it is very linear. It's been linear for far too long. And education is about innovation, right? Like it's supposed to be where we should be creative, we should be problem solving, we should be thinking outside the box, we should be preparing young people for the world that they're about to enter into as adults. And we're really doing them a disservice. Like I often find we're hurting them in a way, we're holding them back and not preparing them for that complex thinking and thinking more in like multidimensional, multimodality kind of thinking, being okay with failure, being humble. Like a lot of this is also just like, you know what, I'm going to like try something out. I'm going to think in a new way. And I don't know if that's going to work. And that's okay. I think there's often a lot of leaders in education that are scared to take risks and to think in a different way because we grew up in that system. And so when we have already a mental set of like how school is or how we learned, and then you become a leader in that system, you kind of just follow the same recipe and the recipe never really worked and it definitely doesn't work anymore. So kind of segueing into what you were talking about with systems thinking and then kind of, if you want to elaborate on these countries you've been talking about, leaders you've been talking about, what you're seeing in maybe some of these innovative schools. I know we're kind of like networking with some of the same people on LinkedIn and connect it to some of these great innovative schools and minds that are doing it differently and could become the models for the future of the education system. So anything you want to kind of elaborate with that, that'd be great.
Well, I'm talking to various leaders at the moment who are in education, and I think the problem is again with education is that people aren't going to be able to stick their head above the parapet. They want to make sure they're safe, and universities surprisingly don't take risks. They don't want to take big leaps of experiments and so forth. So unfortunately, it's the industry that's going to lead it, and the universities will catch up 10, 20 years later. Although I'm talking to some promising universities at the moment who seem to be switched on to the possibility of catching up with the way industry works. And of course, AI is just accentuating everything and making everything move faster. So, we've got a lot to do in education to try and catch up, and same with the health service. They're so far behind, they're still doing things wrong. And the bottom line is it costs the taxpayer huge amounts of money because we just throw more resources at a problem that can't be fixed because all it's got to do, push you further down the river, the problem and so on. So, but there are some enlightened leaders that I've been fortunate to meet, and well, virtually certainly anyway. And we think we can, make things happen. It's probably not appropriate for me to mention who they are at the moment because they're institutions and so forth. But nevertheless, they do wish the best for our children and know that things have to change. Change itself is quite an interesting subject because when you mention change, people sort of get scared about the whole concept of change. And yet it's because we're stuck in ways. There's processes that we can use with systems thinking that can help change to happen because it's driven top down, bottom up, not forced in any way. As soon as you mention change and, well, we're going to do a new policy, you just got to follow it, then people are going to naturally resist that. So we built processes which actually build self-esteem. And that's why I'm really excited about it, because what we did is find the causes for the blockage. And a lot of it's to do with unconscious bias, the way they're being taught, perhaps, or whatever it may be. And not being critical past achievements or learning necessarily, but certainly current learning is still in a very old linear way, which does not allow innovation. And I'm talking about things like creating psychological safety, which are integral to, if you want people to invent things, and you want kids to be smart, they're already smart, but to continue that process, then you have to give them safety in terms of the way they think, not just a physical environment, but safety to, like you said before, make mistakes, or or to experiment with ideas, but not to be punished for getting it wrong. And so, I mean, we know through evolution itself that diversity is an important role in evolution, but we're not adapting our professions to evolutionary processes, which have been around for billions of years, and we're trying to almost unfix or move things in a different direction, which is not conducive to our survival, nevertheless anything else. So yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and it's exciting times in the sense that we're talking to you, and we're going to connect with people who think the same way, and we probably have to lead the way as well to some extent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we need to bring people with us, and that's the difficulty, because if they are stuck in a mode set of thinking, then say, well, this is going to change your future. Well, people don't necessarily warm to the idea. Nevertheless, the challenge for me when I was with scientists is that they all had big egos, and taking them through self-discovery process allowed them to think outside the box for themselves. So it wasn't about me, it was about me providing some of the tools, but getting the mindset in the right way so they could see how they could use the map. So systems thinking isn't just about creating maps, and there are different universities that are experimenting with systems thinking, and a lot of organizations are, but they just create maps of the problem, which doesn't tell them anything. And also, by the time they created the maps of what they think the problem might be, they're already on a journey which closes off other options. Because when you decided this is the area that's going to produce the most fruitful answers, you're blocking off all the other doors. Whereas if you can suspend the possibilities through an innovation matrix, you can still go back to any part of the matrix and rekindle ideas that you might put on the shelf but might reappear. So, and being able to change it in real time was one of the breakthroughs that we had, but also holding on to all that information. And the matrix itself acts like almost like a whirlpool of information, which is relevant to what you need to know. But it does not, like in quantum physics, it suspends judgment. It's like the double split experiment. I don't really know about that, but it sort of contributes to a more better decision making by giving you super options, but it sort of crystallizes into one viewpoint, but it's a strategic way of thinking. It's hard to explain straight away, but I can probably do it with diagrams and things like that. But I think that's where we miss out, because we don't necessarily shake off the baggage, which is the linear thinking. That's the problem. So we attack the source itself and say, well, okay, why do we think this way? And then we give them exercises so they better understand the way they think. And then they will maybe think, well, actually, we could think of it in a better way or get a better result. So I've got plenty of exercise case studies that we've done in the field to say, this, what would you do in this situation? And it's not a question of testing, right or wrong, but actually it's a question of how can you adjust the way you think so you can adapt to new circumstances, which is healthier for the children, because they're living in an uncertain world. How can we prepare people for an uncertain world? And there's processes that we developed which helps prepare people in the way they think. So we don't see calamity as like the end of the world. you might think there's a problem here. How can we circumvent it? With it, and experiment with other ways of trying to get it, to work right. Put it that way. So it's an exciting challenge to get people to go into this mode of thinking. And yet I've done it with scientists. It can be quite difficult because they have the domain expertise. I don't. I don't pretend that I do. But at the same time, they can, if they see a benefit for where does creativity come in, how can creativity help me to think in a much more better, decisive way, then why wouldn't anybody want to take on those sort of tools and try at least experiment with the idea of adjusting the way they think about things, and maybe even evaluating themselves in that process to see that maybe they could think in a different way. And it comes back to, strangely enough, it's just relationships. When the kids need to learn at school, I think, how to build relationships, trusting relationships, whatever those, because you live by understanding how you build relationships and whether you do that successfully or not. And that's a criteria for happiness as well, I think.
Yeah.
That, adversity comes for everybody, everybody experiences that, but it's how you handle it that matters. And I think that's the key to awaken leadership. How do you handle situations that normally would be run very smoothly, but all of a sudden they don't. How do you handle that? Do you panic and run in any direction, or can you have a process to say, I need to think of it this way? So
And I think of thinking,
rabbiting on.
No, I was just thinking, especially with interpersonal skills, I think that's a huge part of what's lacking in the bigger education program. SEL, social emotional learning, interpersonal skills, life skills. You could have little classes here and there, but I really think it should be the foundation of what we're doing in school, because I've learned this actually later in life, that you don't actually succeed because of your own talents and because of your own motivation. You're the driving force, but you succeed because of other people. So you thrive more as a human because other people have helped you, opened up your eyes to new perspectives, gave you connections. Like LinkedIn is like so powerful, like, without saying like, let's create a LinkedIn for a school, but the idea to teach kids about networking and building relationships, like valuable, authentic relationships, not like, I want to get to know this person or do something for them because I just want to get something out of it, not being so like reciprocal, but actually about like, I'm getting to know this person. I understand them. They understand me. We have like same kind of, mindset, and we can grow something together. It says, I think collaboration is definitely the way of now and the future, because we got to get away from just doing it on your own, because it's very egocentric, and egocentric leadership, as we've seen throughout the world, does not really work. And it has to be about leaning on other people, seeing their strengths and connecting. And so I definitely think kids need that more, because it's still very much, and I'm in a private school, so I see it even more so, about competition, right? It's like, I'm doing well, I'm getting an A, or this student over here is like, I'm not doing well, and this student's doing well, I'm a failure. And they're pitting against one another instead of being able to, not, we could talk about changing the whole grading system, but not competing, but like, how do we bring our strengths together and work on a project together, like an entrepreneurial project or a nonprofit project, and actually put that out in the real world and see it with their own sense of agency. I was thinking about like, how do you actually lead a movement and get people to care? The more and more, as I'm talking to people like you on this podcast, I think it's really getting to the heart of what it feels like in the system that doesn't work. And if you talk to the kids, and I talk to teachers as well, they're going to tell you what isn't working and how brokenhearted they are. Kids are going to tell you about their mental health struggles, about feeling like a failure or falling through the cracks. And if all the other stakeholders, which is pretty much anyone in the world that is somehow tied to education, if they have kids that are in the system, they're going to be like, wait a second, do we want these people to be going through mental health crises and having a broken heart and feeling like controlled? We don't want that. Why should we? And why should we pay for it? So you brought up the whole, most of education is paid by taxes. So the taxpayers are the stakeholders. Like, you are paying for this system that is not working and actually hurting people. Do you want to throw your money at something that is hurting people? So I think if you spin it in a way of, we all are stakeholders, we all are part of this, because in most places, we're all paying taxes. We're paying money to these systems like education, healthcare, whatnot. And I think that's how you develop a movement, because you have to get people to care. You have to get people to see it in a way that it touches their life. It touches their heart, or it touches their pocketbook, right? And people care about money just as much as they care about the heart. So I do think it's getting the message out there in a unique way where you can get more people to buy into this new system and new way of thinking. And kind of my last part for you is, I wonder, because the government and politicians are behind these systems, is there a way that you develop systems thinking, or your kind of like leadership mentorship for like government, or like government, politicians? Like, how do we actually get to that point where we can make systemic change?
I think it has to come back to what's the benefits. Is it an economic benefit?
Mm.
Because that's what governments have to listen to. Um, Being in competition doesn't necessarily give you what you want in life. And I've worked with businesses like launching Shell Global Solutions, for example, which actually work with the competitors around the world. And that was quite new for them. And a lot of companies have since followed suit. So in other words, the smart way of doing things is actually to work with people, not work against them or in competition. Okay, when you're in small business, that's a different story, perhaps. But nevertheless, if you don't even consider it, you're actually losing out on the network itself, because it's classically like who do you know that matters rather than what you know. But the network science itself is an important aspect of the learning. So I think that the approach to governments is saying, look, this is costing you trillions of dollars by doing all these things the wrong way around, where you can actually make the same amount of money. Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to get to the money. You get to the money in government. I mean, then people will start to like tune in and want to listen.
Yes. Sorry, I got a very dry throat at the moment.
No worries.
I'm talking too much, too fast. But yeah, so it has to be a business incentive as well.
Yeah. I think eventually we'll get to the part of the government needing to change, because at least in America, what we have seen is not only this mass exodus of teachers, but families are leaving the school system. So you're having families awaken, and they're like, they're not serving my child. And there's so much inequity, in our school system, because the tax system is local, state, so it's different everywhere. And then the families are like, no, I know that there's people doing micro school. I know that there's these innovative online schools, and that gives us more flexibility. So I think families are tuning into and saying, I don't need just this one size fits all approach. And as more and more people leave the system, the professionals and the families, it's like you don't have enough people to actually run it. So I think over time, and I don't think that much time, maybe the next even 5, 10 years, the governments are going to be like, well, it's kind of collapsing. Like, we don't have people in the system. So we're going to have to like go to people like you, John, and listen to what you have to share and think a little differently about how we reshape this educational system. Is there anything else you like to share about your ideas, your work that you're doing, any plugs for anything that our listeners can tune in with your work?
Well, I suppose really I'm in some respect, at the forefront of what could change. I'm speaking to leaders who believe that change has got to happen because systems aren't working as they are. So governments are waking up, and it just means really at the moment, my thinking is, maybe 10 years at a time, unless people sort of catch up. And I'm not saying I've got all the answers. I've only got pieces of the jigsaw puzzle here. But with enough, I suppose, movement of people realizing that, even going to work and you have like poisonous relationships in work, which are not conducive to better profitability or even better performance. All these aspects now, and I'm involved in processes like that. How do we reshape the work environment so there is psychological safety in the work environment? But it's just happening in schools. It shouldn't be stopped. And of course, the teachers are bearing the brunt of all this change or non-change. So we need to empower teachers. We need to empower parents and carers. And I mean, we had some fantastic experience, myself personally, where we did foster training. We did look after a number of foster kids. And having a non-judgment attitude to their behavior, because it wasn't the real person, it was the behavior that was their frustrations being expressed. And of course, how would you expect teachers to deal with that? Because they need that sort of training. But at the same time, you can create the conditions like a flower almost, or a plant. The soil's got to be right, the air and the sunlight and so forth. So my process is about creating the environment for those things to be a natural occurrence. And I think it is spreading now into the workplace, so that we need to then rethink about what the workplace is about. Is it all about top-down thinking, just do as you're told? Or can you actually create an environment where it's a healthy environment? And we did that across many different cultures with Shell. I was fortunate enough to work with different scientists in different countries of the world. And we had to have a common way of thinking, if you like, which embraced cultures, which didn't differentiate, which took on a diversity as a strength. So we were creating environments that where people felt actually quite good about when they went to work. They shared this common purpose. And I think we lose that with our children. And of course, by the time they come into the real world of a career and so forth, they're already fixated on a particular, excuse me, state of mind, state of thinking.
Yes, they are. They are conditioned so much. You think almost like if we go back to elementary school, the way kids think, they're actually more expansive. You're more expansive as a thinker when you're 5 years old, when you're 6 years old. And then as you move through the grades, you're more and more conditioned to that linear thinking. You're actually you told a little kid about systems thinking, they'd probably get it like that. They'd probably totally understand what you're talking about. Yeah, because they're imaginative and they're ripe for exploration, taking risks, not worried about failure, just like go with the flow. That's how they play. Play is actually the best learning tool. Play is the best way for your mind to be expansive because you're just trying things out and you're doing a lot of social emotional learning when you're playing because you're figuring out your buddies and how to like build something and how to like solve this problem and like whose roles are here. They're figuring it out on their own. You see kids on the playground, they are doing it on their own with hardly any adult interaction. And so I feel like if we approach school with a childlike mindset and almost like elevate play, like make play the way that we learn, and like the school environment is like the lab or playground, if you will, and do that all the way through. Because like as an adult, we love coming back to those playful moments when we are on vacation or we're tapping into a new connection and, having these ideas and these kind of like jam sessions. Like it's very playful. and we get this like insight and this sense of like, just being lit up. It's almost like being a kid again.
Mm.
And that's what we need to be doing. I think you are just spearheading a great way to look at the education system. I know you're doing so much more even outside of that. I am excited for the future. I'm excited to see, when you're able to share at like later dates as things are developing, like, how things are going to change in this real time. And, I think in the very near future. So I love what you're doing, John. I'm so glad we're connected. I believe we connected through Hope Patterson. So I'm just going to plug her with her
Yes,
network and community. Such innovative minds, wonderful people that are very much like-minded, like you and I. And I'm excited to continue this connection and collaboration. So thank you so much for being on the Teacher's Story today.
I love being here and talking to like-minded souls as well. So fantastic for me. And we're spreading the word, aren't we? Yeah,
Yes.
things need to move on, not remove the old baggage and move on with something that's much more beneficial for
Yeah.
everybody.
I think so. And I'm going to put all your information in the show notes. So if anybody is interested in connecting with you and learning more about your work, please do. John is great mind and really big heart. So that's what we need to see in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into the Teacher Story. Your support fuels my mission to shape a brighter future for our children. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a review. You can also support me by donating to my Buy Me a Coffee fund, linked in the show notes. Don't forget to explore my guests' work and show them your support. Together, we can make a difference in education. We do this in community. We rise together.